Last night you hallucinated for over an hour. You saw people who do not exist, in places that have never existed. And you believed, completely, without the smallest flicker of doubt, that all of it was real. You lost track of where you were. You lost track of when you were. At certain moments, you lost track of who you were. Your emotions swung from terror to tenderness to joy, with no cause anyone could point to. And then a small noise, or a slant of light, pulled you up out of it. And within 90 seconds, you had forgotten almost the entire thing. Now hold those symptoms in your hand for a second. Hallucination, delusion, fixed false belief held against all evidence. Disorientation in time, place, and identity. Wild emotional swings with no external trigger. And then amnesia for the whole episode. 5 symptoms. In any waking adult, those exact 5 are not a curiosity. They are, more or less word for word, the clinical picture of acute psychosis. If you displayed them at your desk at 2 in the afternoon, a colleague would quietly step into the hall and call an ambulance. And they would be right to. You call it Tuesday. You call it a decent night's sleep. And tonight, on schedule, whether you like it or not, it is going to happen again. Here is the part that took me an embarrassingly long time to actually accept. This nightly bout of madness is not a glitch the brain puts up with. It is not noise the system tolerates on the way to doing the real work. As far as anyone can tell, it is the real work. It may be the single reason you can stay sane during the other 16 hours. It may be the reason your grief eventually loosens its grip. It may be the reason you can look at a friend's face and know, in a fraction of a second, whether they mean you well. And it may, and I want to be careful here, because this is where it gets genuinely strange. It may be the reason our species ever invented anything at all. This is a video about the most irrational thing you do every single day, and about why, without it, there would be no science. That last sentence is a promise. Let me try to earn it. I want to start, though, not with a brain scan, but with a small boy, and a question that I think is one of the best questions anyone has ever asked, and almost nobody asks. The physicist Richard Feynman, and we are going to keep coming back to Feynman tonight, because he is the perfect guide for this, a man who refused to stop poking at the obvious. Feynman told a story about his father. When he was young, his father would set him these puzzles, and one of them was this. Imagine, his father said, that some Martians come down to Earth, and these Martians never sleep. They are awake their entire lives, cradle to grave, fully conscious, no break. And they look at us, and they are baffled. They want you, the human, to explain to them what this sleep thing is. What is it actually like? What happens to you on the inside at the exact moment you go from being awake to being asleep? And the young Feynman tried. He really tried. He lay in bed at night and tried to watch himself fall asleep, to catch the precise instant the light went out, to be present for his own dissolving. He never could. Nobody can. And the reason is exquisite. The moment you notice you are falling asleep, you are awake again. The act of observing it is the act of preventing it. You cannot witness the one thing you do every single day of your life that you are absolutely guaranteed to do. You will fall asleep tonight, and tomorrow night, and roughly 25,000 more times if you are lucky, and you will never, not once, be there for it. Sit with that for a second, because it is quietly insane. There is an experience so reliable that we build our entire civilization around its schedule, and it is structurally impossible for the person having it to observe it happening. You are constitutionally barred from the event. Remember this. We are going to come back to it at the very end, and by then it is going to mean something much heavier than it does right now. Feynman, being Feynman, did not entirely give up. He could not catch the instant of falling asleep, but he found he could watch the approach to it. The foothills, if not the summit. And what he reported there is the second thing I want you to hold on to. He noticed that as he drifted towards sleep, his thoughts kept running. That part is normal. But the logic between the thoughts started to quietly come apart. One idea would lead to another, and that to another, and it all felt perfectly reasonable from the inside. And then at some point, he would try to trace the chain backward, to ask himself, wait, how did I get from there to here? And he would find that the links were simply gone. Not broken, gone. As if they had never been load-bearing in the first place. And here is the detail that sends a small chill down my spine every time. The sense of coherence, the feeling that your thoughts are making sense, that feeling survives intact, right up to the edge of total nonsense. You do not feel yourself becoming irrational. You feel completely lucid all the way down until you cross over and there is no longer a you to feel anything. I think most of us assume our sense of being rational is hooked up to actually being rational. Like a fuel gauge, that if our thinking started falling apart, an alarm would go off. Feynman's observation, which you can replicate yourself tonight for free, is that there is no alarm. The gauge reads full until the engine is already gone. Your confidence that you are thinking clearly is not evidence that you are. I find that genuinely unsettling, and I think you should too, because it means the border between sense and nonsense in your own head is not guarded. You walk across it nightly and feel nothing. So, we have a thing we cannot watch, and a mind that comes apart without sounding any alarm. Now let me give it a name, and the name is going to do some violence to how you think about your bed. The book underneath a lot of tonight is Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. Walker is a neuroscientist, a professor at Berkeley, 2 decades deep in sleep research, and the book was a genuine phenomenon, a global bestseller, the thing your doctor mentioned, the thing that made half your friends suddenly militant about their 8 hours. And I have to do something here that I am going to do every time it is honest to do it, because you are smart and you can smell a too clean story from a mile off. I cannot hand you this book as gospel. In 2019, a researcher named Alexei Guzzi published a long, careful, kind of devastating critique, titled, more or less, that Walker's book is riddled with scientific and factual errors. And some of his catches stuck. Walker had claimed that routinely sleeping under 6 or 7 hours more than doubles your risk of cancer. The evidence does not actually support that. He referred to a World Health Organization declaration of a sleep loss epidemic that, as far as anyone can find, the WHO never made. He attributed a specific 8-hour recommendation to an organization that did not make it. In one chart, a data bar that complicated his point had quietly gone missing. Walker later acknowledged some of these as errors and said he would fix them. Now, I am not telling you this to torch the book. Most of the core neuroscience we are going to walk through tonight holds up. I have gone and checked the load-bearing studies against the primary literature, and I will flag the soft spots as we hit them. I am telling you this because it is itself one of the threads of tonight's video. The man who wrote the definitive popular book on sleep also let a beautiful story outrun his data in places. And that, a compelling narrative running ahead of the evidence, is not a footnote to tonight's topic. By the end, you may suspect it is the topic. Hold that thought too. We now have 3. So here is Walker's reframe, and once it is in your head, you will not get it out. He looks at those 5 symptoms from the opening: hallucination, delusion, disorientation, emotional swings, amnesia. And he points out that we have a clinical word for that exact cluster. And the word is psychosis. And then he asks the obvious, terrible question. Why, every single night, does evolution march a perfectly healthy brain straight into a state that, if it showed up during the day, we would treat as a medical emergency? Sleep is not rest. Or, no, let me rephrase that, because rest is part of it. Sleep is scheduled psychosis. And the question is not, how do we stop it? The question is, what is it for? Because evolution does not build expensive, dangerous machinery for nothing. And it is expensive. And it is dangerous. Let me show you just how dangerous. Because the price tag tells you how badly the brain needs whatever it is buying. When you enter REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, the stage where the vivid hallucinating happens, your brain does something that, the first time I understood it, made me put the book down and stare at the wall. It paralyzes you. Seconds before the dreaming begins, a signal fires from deep in your brainstem and switches off the tone in nearly every voluntary muscle in your body. Your arms, your legs, your torso, functionally offline. You become, in Walker's phrase, a prisoner inside your own body. This is real. This is called REM atonia, and you have almost certainly felt the seam of it. That occasional horror of waking up and finding for a few seconds that you cannot move. That is sleep paralysis. That is just the off switch being slightly slow to lift. Now, why? Why would evolution take an animal in the wilderness, an animal that might need to run or fight at any second, and every single night render it completely helpless for hours? That is an enormous risk. Natural selection does not hand out enormous risks as party favors. There has to be something on the other side of the ledger worth being eaten for. And here is the answer, and it is the first hard piece of evidence that dreaming is not leakage, that it is doing something. The reason your body has to be paralyzed is that your brain is not idling. During REM, your motor cortex, the part that issues commands to move, is firing, actually firing, sending real instructions to run, to reach, to swing. It is generating genuine movement commands in response to a hallucination. And so, the brainstem has to physically cut the wires between the brain and the muscles, because otherwise you would get up and act it out. You would run from the imaginary tiger and into the actual fire. We know this is true because the safety system sometimes fails. There is a condition, REM, sleep behavior disorder, in which the paralysis does not engage, and those people do exactly what you would fear. They punch, they leap from bed, they run into walls, enacting their dreams in the physical world, sometimes injuring themselves or the person beside them. The straitjacket is not a metaphor. It is a load-bearing piece of safety equipment, and when it breaks, the danger it was built to contain comes spilling straight out into the bedroom. So the dream is not a passive film playing to an empty theater. It is so vivid, so motorically real, that your body has to be chained down to survive it. Which raises the question with real force now. What is so important that it is worth being paralyzed and defenseless for, night after night, for your entire life? Before I give you the answer, I have to take something away from you, because you are probably carrying around the wrong one.
You are probably carrying around Freud. For about a century, the dominant story about dreams was the one Freud sold us: that dreams are disguised wishes, that there is a censor in your mind, and your forbidden desires sneak past it in symbolic costume, and the dream is a coded message, and if you just had the right decoder ring, or the right expensive analyst, you could read the secret. The cigar that is not a cigar. The whole apparatus. It is a wonderful story. It is the reason dream interpretation is still a parlor game. And as a scientific account of what dreaming is, it appears to be essentially wrong. There is no good evidence for the censor, for the disguise, for the systematic symbolic code. What killed it, slowly, was not a better armchair theory. It was the ability to look. When researchers put dreaming brains into scanners and watched, they did not find a censor. They found a very specific and very revealing pattern of lights. The regions responsible for cold logic and rational executive control. The prefrontal areas. The part of you that, when you are awake, says, "Wait, that doesn't make sense. That's impossible." Those go quiet. They dim. Which, by the way, is exactly why dreams feel coherent from the inside, even when they are absurd. The inner critic, the thing that would object, has clocked out. Remember Feynman feeling perfectly lucid right up to the edge of nonsense? Same machinery. The alarm is off. And while logic dims, other regions blaze. The visual centers, generating imagery with no input from your closed eyes. The emotional centers, including the amygdala, running hot. And the autobiographical memory networks, pulling up the people and places of your life. So a dream is not a coded letter from your repressed desires. A dream is what a brain produces when you take its rational supervisor offline and let its emotional and memory systems run the show, unsupervised, in the dark. And here's the detail that finally told me what dreams are about. When you actually study dream content, and people have, painstakingly, the specific events of your day, the so-called day residue, show up surprisingly rarely. On the order of a couple of % of dream content is a faithful replay of something that literally happened to you. You are not, mostly, rewatching your Tuesday, but the emotional themes of your waking life, the worries, the tensions, the feeling tones, those carry over at a far, far higher rate. Your dreams are not replaying the events of your life. They are metabolizing your feelings about them. They take the emotion and strip it loose from the literal scene and run it through some other logic entirely. And the moment you really absorb that the brain spends its nights chewing on your emotions in a private room where the rational supervisor is not allowed in, you start to see that this was never really a video about sleep. Let me say that again, because it is the hinge the whole thing turns on, and I want you to feel it turn. I told you at the start this was a video about the most irrational thing you do every day. And it is. But somewhere in the last few minutes, the floor quietly shifted, and we are not actually standing in a video about sleep anymore. We are standing in a video about 3 things that I think most people assume are just given, just part of being a person. The fact that you eventually heal from the worst things that happen to you. The fact that you can read another human being's face and know friend from threat. And the fact that every so often, a human mind reaches a genuinely new idea that was not in any of the inputs. We treat all 3 of those as obvious, as the baseline, as what minds simply do. What I am about to argue, what the evidence, carefully handled, seems to argue, is that none of them are free. All 3 are manufactured, and they are manufactured at night by the madness in the room where logic is not allowed. Healing, social intelligence, and creativity are not properties of the waking mind. They are the residue of a controlled psychosis you undergo while you are unconscious and paralyzed and unable to take any credit for it. Let me show you all 3. They get stranger as we go. The first one is the one that I think about the most, and it is the one I would most like to be true. And so it is the one where I am going to be most careful with you. Consider what happens to a painful memory over time. Something terrible happens to you. In the moment, the memory and the pain are fused. You cannot recall the event without the feeling slamming back in at full force. And yet, for most people, most of the time, something remarkable happens over the following weeks and months. You can still recall the event. The facts are intact, but the charge has drained out of it. You can hold the memory in your mind without being knocked flat by it. We have a folk phrase for this. We say, time heals. Walker's claim, and the underlying research here comes from real published work, his own and others, is that the folk phrase is pointing at the wrong thing. Time does not heal. Time is just the bucket the healing happens to sit in. What heals is REM sleep, specifically dreaming. And the proposed mechanism is one of those things that is so clean, it feels like it was designed. During waking life, and during most of sleep, your brain is bathed in a stress-related chemical, noradrenaline, the brain's version of adrenaline, the molecule of fight or flight and high alert. But there is exactly one state in the entire 24-hour cycle where noradrenaline falls away to almost nothing. One room in the whole house where that particular alarm chemical is switched off. That room is REM sleep. And so the idea, Walker and his colleague Vanderhelm framed it memorably as overnight therapy, is that during REM, your brain reactivates the painful memory and reprocesses it, but for the first and only time, it does so in a space free of the stress chemistry. It reruns the difficult experience in the one neurochemically safe room it has. And in doing that, repeatedly, night after night, it gradually peels the emotional charge off the factual record. It keeps the information, what happened, what you learned, and it dissolves the dread. Sleep to remember the fact. Sleep to forget the sting. Now, my honesty flag. I told you I would raise them. The broad neurochemistry here, that noradrenaline is extraordinarily low in REM, that this changes how memory networks recombine, that is solidly established in the primary literature. The leap to, and therefore dreaming, is your emotional surgeon is more of a model than a closed case. The direct experimental evidence is genuinely thinner than the elegance of the story makes it feel. And at least one sleep physician, looking at Walker's own headline study,
said the team had probably overstepped a little on the conclusions. So hold it as a strong, beautiful hypothesis, not a settled law. I would rather you remember it as fragile and true-shaped than swallow it whole. But here's the thing that makes me think the core of it is right. The most convincing evidence for a healing system is often what happens when it breaks. And it does break, and we have a name for the wreckage: post-traumatic stress disorder. In PTSD, that nightly shutoff of noradrenaline appears to fail. The safe room is not safe anymore. The stress chemical floods in. And so the brain does exactly what it does every night. It reactivates the painful memory to process it. But now there is no protective shutoff, and so instead of draining the charge, the replay re-traumatizes. The memory comes back at full emotional voltage, again and again, night after night, in the nightmares that define the condition. The healing system, running its normal program in a broken chemical environment, becomes the wound. It keeps re-injuring the person it was built to mend. Let that settle for a moment. The same nightly machinery that quietly carries your grief away from you while you sleep is, in someone with PTSD, the thing hammering the trauma back in. It is the identical process. The only difference is one molecule switched on when it should be off. And if that is even approximately right, then it reframes something a lot of us have done at 3 a.m. You know the experience. You wake at 3 a.m. and your mind drags up the worst thing. The loss, the regret, the fear, and it cycles. And you lie there feeling like a malfunctioning machine, like a person who cannot even sleep properly. I have spent that hour. Maybe you have too. And the reframe is this: that brain in that hour is not malfunctioning. It is at work. It is doing the surgery. The 3 a.m. churn that feels like the system failing may in fact be the system running. If something like that lands for you, if the idea that your sleepless brain is laboring on your behalf changes how that hour feels even slightly, then I will say the one thing I am going to say all night about this channel. This whole place exists because enough curious people decided this kind of reframe was worth sticking around for. So if this is your sort of rabbit hole, subscribing is genuinely a good move, because the room we are walking into next is stranger than this one, and I am not done. Okay, onward. The second function takes the same machinery and points it not inward at your own grief, but outward at everyone else. Here is a thought experiment. I want you to imagine you have lost the ability to read faces. Not the ability to see them, your vision is perfect, but the layer underneath, the instant, wordless read you do constantly without knowing you are doing it. This person is warm. This one is annoyed. That one across the room is angry, and I should keep my distance. That entire silent channel, gone. Every face you look at is just geometry. You would have to consciously interrogate every interaction like a detective with no instincts. You would, within a day, be exhausted and probably terrified. That read, the social emotional read, turns out to be something your brain retunes overnight. And specifically, REM sleep appears to recalibrate the circuitry that judges other people's emotional states and intentions. We know this, again,
from breaking it. When you deprive people of sleep, and particularly when you mess with REM, their ability to read faces degrades in a very particular and very telling direction. It does not just get fuzzy and random, it skews toward threat. The sleep-deprived brain starts reading neutral faces as hostile. It starts reading even friendly, approachable faces as menacing. The amygdala, the threat detector, becomes hyper-reactive and loses its normal regulation by the calmer, rational regions above it. The brakes come off the alarm. And I want you to really sit in the human consequence of that, because it is bleaker and more familiar than a lab finding has any right to be. When the brain cannot accurately read intent, it does not throw up its hands and pick at random. It defaults to danger. It assumes the worst. A neutral colleague becomes someone who is against you. A tired partner's flat expression becomes contempt.
The world, very gradually, starts to look hostile. Not because the world changed, but because the instrument you read it with lost its calibration overnight, and that instrument fails toward fear. This connects to something we have looked at before on this channel, when we got into how some brains process other people, and the pattern there was eerily similar. When the machinery for reading intent goes wrong, the fallback setting is suspicion. It seems to be a deep design feature. A brain that cannot tell friend from foe would rather treat a friend as a foe than the reverse, because in evolutionary terms, one mistake costs you a relationship, and the other mistake costs you your life. The brain is biased toward the survivable error, and so, deprived of its nightly recalibration, it slides toward seeing enemies everywhere. Lose your dreams, and the whole world starts to look like it is out to get you, which is a strange and slightly horrifying thought to carry into the next time you go a few nights short, and notice that everyone suddenly seems like an idiot or an antagonist. That might not be them. That might be your face reader, drifting out of tune in the dark, with no one there to tune it. So, Function 1. The brain dissolves your own pain. Function 2. It keeps you correctly tuned to everyone else's. And now the third one, which is the one that, if I have done my job, you have been half waiting for since I mentioned the periodic table at the start. There is a famous list of ideas that are supposed to have arrived in dreams. Mendeleev, exhausted after days of struggling to organize the chemical elements, is said to have fallen asleep and seen, fully formed, a table in which every element fell into its proper place, and woke and wrote down the periodic table that hangs in every chemistry classroom on Earth. The chemist Kekulé, wrestling with the structure of the benzene molecule, is said to have dreamed of a snake seizing its own tail, and woke understanding that the molecule was a ring. Otto Loewy, the story goes, dreamed the design of an experiment with a frog's heart that would later win him the Nobel Prize. Woke, scribbled an unreadable note, could not decipher it in the morning, and then, mercifully, dreamed it again the next night, and this time ran straight to the lab. These are gorgeous stories. They are repeated everywhere, including in places by Walker, and I went to check them, the way I check things, and what I found is a small, perfect lesson. The exact lesson the Gouze critique was teaching us at the start, now wearing a different costume. Because most of these stories are, to put it gently, much softer than they sound. The Mendeleev dream, when historians actually went into the archives, appears to be, and I am using the careful word a real paper on this used, specious. There is no dream report from Mendeleev himself. The evidence is a second-hand account from a colleague written down much later. Worse for the legend,
The archival work suggests Mendeleev had already worked out the periodic table before the supposed dream took place. A dream may well have happened afterward, refining the arrangement, but the romantic version, where the whole thing arrives gift-wrapped from the void, does not survive contact with the record. Kekule's snake? There is apparently no written account of it from him until something like 28 years after the fact. Lowy never, even in his own autobiographical writing, actually left a clear written report of the dream everyone attributes to him. So here is the trap, and I almost walked into it, and I suspect Walker did too.
The story dreams give us our greatest scientific breakthroughs is so beautiful, so satisfying, so perfectly on theme, that it spreads faster than the evidence can chase it down. It is the periodic table example of a compelling narrative outrunning the data. The very thing we caught the sleep book doing at the start, the history of science has been doing for a century with its favorite dream stories. And I want to be honest that this is uncomfortable for me, because it is so much cooler if Mendeleev dreamed the table. I was, as I sometimes am, maximally biased toward the beautiful version. I wanted it. So why am I telling you this in a section that is supposed to be the climax, the payload, the part where dreaming gives us genius? Why am I demolishing my own best material? Because here is the turn. The anecdotes are mostly legend, and the thing underneath them, the thing you can actually test in a controlled laboratory, is real. And it is stranger than the legend. And it does not need the legend at all. You can take the romantic question. Does sleeping on a problem actually help you solve it? And you can drag it out of the realm of charming anecdote and into a controlled experiment. And people did. The cleanest one I found is from a team led by Ulrich Wagner and Jan Born, published in Nature in 2004. And the design is genuinely clever, so let me walk you through it, because the result is the kind of thing that should be more famous than it is. They gave people a boring number task. You take a string of digits, you apply a couple of simple rules step by step, and you grind out an answer. Tedious. But hidden inside the task, and the subjects were not told this, was a shortcut, a secret structure. If you noticed it, you could leapfrog straight to the answer, and your speed would suddenly jump. The shortcut was sitting right there the whole time, in every single trial, completely available to anyone who happened to see it. So they trained everyone on the task, then they split them up. One group got to go away and sleep for 8 hours through the night. The other groups stayed awake, some through the night, some across an equivalent stretch of daytime. Then everybody came back and did the task again, and the experimenters simply watched to see who suddenly got it, who had the click, the insight, the moment of seeing the hidden rule. In the group that stayed awake, the rule was spotted by roughly 20% of people. A reasonable number. Some people just notice things. In the group that slept, it was about 60%. Sleep roughly tripled the number of people who had the insight. Same task, same hidden shortcut, sitting there the entire time, fully visible. The only thing that changed was that one group's brains were allowed to go through the night, to enter the room, run the madness, do whatever it is the madness does. And they came out the other side 3 times as likely to have seen the thing that was in front of them all along. Let me make sure that lands, because it is so easy to nod past. Nobody learned anything new while they slept. no information was added. The shortcut was equally available to everyone before and after. What sleep did was reorganize what they already had until the hidden patterns surfaced into consciousness. The facts were already in the room. Sleep is what turned the facts into an idea. And that, finally, is the thing the legends were clumsily pointing at. Not that an angel hands you the periodic table in a dream, but that a brain, running its nightly process of loosening connections and recombining memories with the rational supervisor switched off, is far better than your waking, logical, sensible mind at finding the remote association. The link that is too weird, too far away, for your daytime mind to bother with. Your waking brain is a brilliant, disciplined accountant. It follows the obvious connections, the ones that pay off, the well-worn paths. It will not waste time on the absurd leap. But insight, the real kind, almost always lives out on the absurd leap. And the only time your brain stops being a sensible accountant and starts making absurd leaps is the time it goes insane. At night, in the dark, while you are paralyzed and unconscious, and certain, if you are dreaming at all, that something impossible is completely real. The madness is not the price of the insight. The madness is the method. To find the connection that is too strange for your sane mind, you have to hand the problem to a mind that has temporarily stopped being sane. Which brings me, finally, to the real shape of the whole thing, and to a distinction I have been circling all night without naming. There is a difference between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge is the facts, the elements, the data, the things that happen to you, the faces you have seen. Wisdom is knowing what the facts mean together, how the elements relate, what the data implies, how to carry your losses, who to trust. And what I think this entire body of research is whispering, across all three functions, is that the bridge from knowledge to wisdom is not built during the day. The day is when you gather the facts. The night, the dreaming, the controlled psychosis, is when the facts get sorted into meaning. Your grief gets sorted from its sting. The faces get sorted into friend and threat. The data gets sorted into the hidden rule. The difference between knowing a great deal and understanding anything may be, almost literally, a night's sleep. There is a story about Thomas Edison that I think is the right note to start landing this on. Edison did not trust the full surrender of sleep. He thought it was a waste, a lazy habit. But he was also obsessed with the ideas that seemed to bubble up right at the threshold of it, in that drifting, link-loosening borderland Feynman described. So the story goes that he would settle into a chair to nap, holding a few steel ball bearings loosely in his hand, with a metal plate on the floor below. And as he sank towards sleep and his muscles went slack, that same atonia we talked about, the off switch beginning to throw, his hand would open, the ball bearings would crash onto the plate, and the noise would yank him awake. And in that instant, he believed, he could reach back and grab whatever strange, useful, half-formed thing his loosening mind had just produced on the way down. He was trying to rob the threshold of madness. He wanted the ideas the insanity makes, but he wanted to be awake to steal them, because he knew, everyone who has ever done real creative work half knows this, that the good stuff does not come from the disciplined accountant. It comes from the place just past where the accountant stops. He was, in his stubborn way, trying to cheat the system we have been describing all night. to get the genius without the surrender. To stay awake at the one event you are never allowed to witness. So let me bring us all the way back, because I made you a couple of promises at the start, and it is time to close the loops. I told you, near the beginning, to remember Feynman and his father's Martians. The impossible task of watching yourself fall asleep. The one experience you will have tens of thousands of times and never once witness. And I told you it would mean something heavier by the end. Here is what it means now. The thing you cannot watch is not a quirk. It is the single most important and most creative thing your brain does, and you are barred from the room while it happens. The work that makes you wise, that heals you, that hands you your best ideas. You are not allowed to be present for any of it. You are escorted out of your own mind precisely when the most interesting work begins. And I told you to watch for the way a beautiful story outruns its evidence. First with Walker's book, then with Mendeleev's dream. And the closing of that loop is maybe the most human part of all of this. We so badly want the genius to be ours. We want Mendeleev awake at his desk, seized by his own brilliance.
We cannot stand the version where the idea arrived from a process he did not control and could not even remember. So we tell the story where he gets the credit, and we do it for ourselves every single morning. So here is where I will leave you. Tonight, on schedule, you will go quietly insane. You will hallucinate. You will believe impossible things. You will be paralyzed so that you do not act them out. And while you do, something in the dark will sort through the grief you could not sort today, and quietly drain a little of its charge. It will decide on your behalf who out there is a friend and who is a threat. And maybe, without asking your permission, without telling you it is happening, it will solve the problem you gave up on this afternoon by making the one absurd connection your sensible daytime mind would never have allowed itself to make. And in the morning, you will wake up. You will remember almost none of it.
And when the answer surfaces, or the grief feels lighter, or you simply find you can face the day, you will take the credit. You will call it your idea. You will call it your strength. You will call it you. You will never know it was the madness that did it. You are a genius exactly once a day, and you sleep right through it.